An Act of Remembrance by Trevor Fowler. In a few days' time, many in the world will be remembering the war dead, and in particular this year observing the 100th anniversary of the end of hostilities in World War I. For me, although remembrance has been marked with the purchase of a paper copy and consideration of the sacrifices made to bring about or maintain the peaceful country I live in, I thought this year I would go a stage further. The Royal British Legion website has among its special offerings to mark the centenary a special leather-based copy that came with a certificate of dedication to an actual fallen serviceman. I personally did not lose any relatives in any war of this century or the last, so I thought this might be a good opportunity to acquire someone personal to find out about, reflect on, to remember. Once the poppy was ordered, I waited in anticipation as to which card I had been dealt. When it arrived, the card I got was somewhat of a surprise. It was a Royal Navy man, Able Seaman W. Vyse, service number J13561, cemetery commemorated at Luton Church Burial Ground. One normally associates World War I with land-based fighting, the trenches, Flanders Fields, the Somme, Passchendaele, Verdun, etc. Naval battles, with Jutland being the largest, are much less in the public mind. Probably very unusually for members of the Royal Navy, Able Seaman Vyse has the luxury of having a standard individual burial, and not one where the body, along with most if not all shipmates, lies on the bottom of the sea with the ship. Putting his rank and name into Google gave a large amount of very interesting information, most notably from the website www.worldwar1luton.com. Had it not been for the contributions to this site, there would be no story to tell over and above the information on the certificate of dedication. My gratitude is extended to all the contributors whose information I've used, in particularly a certain Karen C., who provided the information for Able Seaman Vyse and many others whose grave I visited. Able Seaman William Vyse was born in Enfield, Essex, on the 12th of November 1894. The 1901 census reveals him to be living in Butterfield Green, Stokesley. His father is a scaffolder and a widower with 4 children, Herbert 11, William 7, Topsy 5 and Edith 3. In April 1911, the family are living at 95 Ash Road, and 16-year-old William is working as a horse driver. In August of that year, he joins the Royal Navy. His service record describes him as 5 foot 2.5 tall, with a fair complexion, with light hair and grey eyes. The starting rank was boy 2nd class, and his father would have signed a declaration that William would serve a minimum of 12 years. Between February and May 1912, he served on the Leviathan, an armoured cruiser. William served on other ships, during which he attained the rank of Able Seaman due to his good character and length of service. He was discharged from service in February 1915 due to ill health from the Royal Navy Barracks at Crystal Palace, known as Victory 2, Victory 1 being the barracks at Portsmouth, and on the 16th of August he dies from tuberculosis. As part of my Act of Remembrance, my travels take me to the Crawley Green Road Cemetery in Luton, Bedfordshire. The date of this venture is Saturday the 3rd of November 2018. The cemetery itself was not hard to find, but the main entrance and the graveyard beyond looked too small to access by car. I was vaguely expecting to be able to park somewhere near the grave, as I've been able to do so on so many other cemeteries. In the end, I managed to park on Ketton Close and use the pedestrian access on the east side of the cemetery. Not apparent from the internet aerial view of the site, I was unprepared as to how hilly its position was. The Ketton Close entrance was among the highest points, the terrain then sloping down, sometimes surprisingly steeply, to the western end, just short of the railway. What I was also unprepared for was how beautiful and picturesque it was. The weather was intermittent cloud and sunny intervals, the autumnal shedding of leaves also in full swing. The place was a lovely mix of greens, yellows and browns of every hue. The whole site had a naturalness that was very pleasing to the eye. Every aspect seemed to be photogenic. Most fallen soldiers of the war, if they have a headstone in a Commonwealth war grave cemetery at all, those designed by the likes of Edwin Lutyens, Reginald Bloomfield and others, will be in neat rows and ranks. This neatness, while certainly tidy, has a rather alien feel to it, and, or so I've read, is somewhat off-putting for bird life and other animals. The graves at the upper elevations were varied in shape, but were considerably packed more densely than those at the lowest levels. Military headstones with their characteristic shape were predominantly, at least as far as I could see, on the lowest section of the graveyard, nearest the railway. They were not in a separate section, but were mingled in with the civilian ones. Even so, many of the stones were rather isolated, in the section which generally was rather sparsely populated. The residents, rather than being ordered rows in a dormitory or barrack room, were rather like random guests at a hotel in low season. A casual stroll round the gravestones, and with the aid of the World War I website, most of the military graves seen had a unique story to tell, but with the same sad and often tragic ending. The backgrounds of these men were what one might describe as working class. Quite a number of the men's families were involved in the manufacture of straw hats, something that Luton as a whole is associated with, at least in the past. The records also demonstrated that the concept of working from home is far from a modern one, with many wives, mothers and sisters of the fallen soldiers turning their homes into mini straw hat factories. One such person was Private Horace William Eales of the Royal Fusiliers. He had joined up in June 1915 and in September of that year was posted to France. Private Eales suffered badly from the effects of combat and suffered what was described as insanity and attacks of mania and delusion as a result of stress of active service, being later admitted to the Canehill Asylum in Croydon. Today, Private Eales' condition might be known as shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder. For these young men behind the gravestones, the cause of death was health-related, with the same few diseases cropping up several times: influenza, pneumonia, or, as in Able Seaman Visor's case, tuberculosis. Serious and often fatal diseases then, they are not so fatal nowadays. Medical advances, and in particular the creation of the NHS, now 70 years old this year, means that vital medical treatment is for all, and not just to those who could afford it, or be reliant on charity or workplace payment schemes. The names of the fallen came from good traditional stock: George, Edward, Charles, Albert, Arthur, and seemingly by far the most popular, William, names that everyone would know how to pronounce and spell, names which many would dismiss nowadays as somehow fuddy-duddy, but nevertheless have a greater pedigree than the likes of, say, Troy, Ryan, or Shane. Two of the headstones that I saw had personalised inscriptions on them. One was Private George Patton of the Bedfordshire Regiment. The years have passed, our hearts still sore, as time goes on, we miss him more. Another, though a rather more upbeat one, was on the headstone of Private Charles Edward Payne, who, as the record says, had a funeral with full military honours. Remembrance is a golden chain which binds us till we meet again. Most, however, not only had no inscription, but seemed to have been completely forgotten as well. Even the civilian graves in the cemetery were marked by empty flower vases and an overall look of neglect. Able Seaman Visor's grave, while similar to the others in state, was also several feet away from any of its neighbours. The headstone reads, W. Vise, Able Seaman RN J13561, HMS Victory, 16th of August 1915, age 20. This wasn't, of course, the HMS Victory, one of the most famous battleships in history. This HMS Victory was the name given to the Royal Navy barracks at both Portsmouth and Crystal Palace. Behind Able Seaman Visor's grave, by about 40 feet, was a group of 4 military graves. In the setting, they looked as if they were related, but on closer inspection revealed that they were not. 2 of these had little additional detail indicated on the website, not even their first names. There was a Private H. Davis of the Royal Defence Corps, died 7th of February 1917, aged 49, and Private A. Smith of the Queen's Regiment, Royal West Surrey. He died on the 19th of November 1917. However, it is the other 2 stories that provide most for reflection. Driver Charles William Fowler of the Royal Field Artillery drowned himself at the Waller Street Baths on the 28th of April 1916. The Waller Street Baths were a popular attraction for troops, and in addition to swimming were used for washing in an era where few houses had their own bathroom. The coroner speculated that it was the stress of military service that had contributed to his decision. Private Frank Spacey of the Royal Berkshire Regiment was found to have drowned himself at the Farley Green Pond in Luton by a group of boys. Private Spacey was apparently well known in the town, and it was speculated that he committed suicide to avoid arrest, as he had deserted one regiment and joined another. These 2 individuals would have been far from the only soldiers who would have taken their own lives. These desperate circumstances is aptly described in a poem by Siegfried Sassoon. I knew a simple soldier boy who grinned at life in empty joy, slept soundly through the lonesome dark, and whistled early with the lark. In winter trenches cowed and glum, with crumps and lice and lack of rum, he put a bullet through his brain. No one spoke of him again. You smug-faced crowds with kindling eye, who cheer when soldier lads march by, sneak home and pray you'll never know the hell where youth and laughter go. While one of the subplots of World War I was the campaign for women to get the vote, what is overlooked is that many of the men who were pressured, cajoled or shamed into enlisting were not able to vote either, as they were too young. With male-only enlistment, what began with patriotic propaganda that it'll all be over by Christmas, the fact that it didn't, and the casualties mounted, meant that the authorities had to employ increasingly more sinister tactics prior to the imposition of full conscription. The suffragette movement, including Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter Christabel, in addition to campaigning to give women the vote, lobbied to introduce universal conscription for men, including those who did not have the vote themselves. They handed out white feathers of cowardice to young men in civilian clothing to shame them into enlisting. Many mistakes were made with this tactic. One individual who receives a white feather was to be Seaman George Sampson, who was in civilian clothes to attend a public reception in his honour. He had been awarded the Victoria Cross for gallantry in the Gallipoli campaign. Able Seaman Vyse is in a minority of men who chose to join the Royal Navy rather than be conscripted through either legal or moral pressure. Upon his discharge from service on the grounds of health, it is possible he might have been a target for this indiscriminate shaming as well. The address given for Able Seaman Vyse during the war was at 95 Ash Road. When I got there, number 93 was at the end of a row of terraced houses, with number 95 being part of a block of flats that I later found out to be built in the 1970s. Whether the original 95 was part of the terrace or separate could not easily be found. Ash Road is a narrow one-way street, ethnically diverse and situated very close to the Luton Town football ground, and I can well imagine members of the Vyse family being ardent supporters. Nowadays, in common with other major football grounds, opposing team supporters will be segregated to avoid trouble brewing and boiling over already heated passions. Passions in Europe were aroused by the tinderbox of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and it is galling to reflect the belligerent spirit still exhibited not only on the football terraces but in so many areas of public life. Had Able Seaman Vyse's health been better, and he remained in the Royal Navy, he would most likely to have either gone down in battle on a ship or survived the war and become a veteran. If either of these happened, he would most likely not have been buried at Crawley Green Road, or be one of the fallen that would be remembered by someone 100 years later and with no connection with either him or his extended family. Similarly, had the course of World War I taken a different path, the world we would be living in might be unrecognisable to what we now live in and take for granted. The words of a poem by US Army veteran Charles M. Province sums up that what we might take for granted was enabled by so many who paid for it with their lives. It is the soldier, not the minister, who has given us freedom of religion. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier, not the campus organizer, who has given us freedom to protest. It is the soldier, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It is the soldier, not the politician, who has given us the right to vote. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protester to burn the flag. It is hard to imagine why World War I was fought in the first place, still less its rather unsatisfactory conclusion. The countless dead on both sides, not to mention the economic crippling of the countries involved, and the persistent scars on all those affected. The Second World War had a clear objective and purpose, but the lessons for humanity, that the price for war should be worth paying for the principles involved, comes with the first. Able Seaman Vyse may have been unremarkable at the time, but events far beyond his control has culminated in this particular Act of Remembrance.